Chapter 1. The Last Order. Britannia was dying. Not with a scream, not with a battle, not even with a rebellion, but with paperwork. For nearly 3 centuries, Rome had ruled this distant island at the edge of the world. Roads had been built across forests and marshes. Forts had risen from empty hills. Towns had grown behind stone walls. Temples, bathhouses and villas had spread across the landscape. Now, in the year 408, it was all coming to an end. The empire was retreating, not suddenly, not in panic. The process had been unfolding for years. Soldiers had been transferred to Gaul. Supplies had become irregular. Garrison strengths had quietly diminished. Civil officials had been instructed to prepare records, inventories, and accounts. Families with influence or wealth had begun leaving the province. Rome had not abandoned Britannia overnight. Rome had been saying goodbye for a very long time. The trouble was that the enemies beyond the frontier had noticed. Rain swept across the northern hills as a mounted scout urged his exhausted horse toward the fort of Vindolanda. The animal's flanks were white with sweat. Its rider looked little better. Mud covered both man and beast. His cloak was torn. One cheek bore a fresh cut. Behind him, darkness gathered over the high moors beyond the wall. The scout did not look back. He had already seen enough. The gates of the fort opened just before sunset. The horse almost collapsed as it entered. Several soldiers rushed forward. The rider slid from the saddle and stumbled. "Tribune," he gasped. "Where is the tribune?" The news spread through the fort before the scout reached headquarters. Something had happened beyond the wall. Something serious. By the time the man entered the command building, half the officers already knew. Tribune Marcus Flavius Corvinus stood waiting beside a table covered with maps. He was 53 years old. Too old, some said, for active service. The scar running across his jaw suggested otherwise. Marcus had spent most of his life on frontiers. Germania, Dacia, Pannonia, now Britannia. The empire had changed around him. Emperors had risen and fallen. Legions had vanished. Entire provinces had been lost. Yet somehow he remained. A relic of an older Rome, a harder Rome. The scout saluted weakly, then collapsed onto one knee. Marcus immediately handed him a cup of water. "Tell me." The man drank, then spoke. "There are thousands." The room became silent. The scout pointed north. "Beyond the wall." Marcus's expression never changed. "How many?" "At least 3,000. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances. The scout continued. "Perhaps more." "Who?" "Picts." He swallowed. "And Scotti." A murmur spread through the room. Neither enemy was unusual. Raids happened constantly. This was different. Everyone understood that. 3,000 warriors was not a raid. It was an invasion. Marcus walked slowly toward the map table. Rain hammered against the roof. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. The scout continued speaking. Entire clans moving south. He pointed at the map. Not just warriors. Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I saw wagons." The room fell completely silent. Wagons, families, livestock, children. Not a raid. Not even a war band. A migration. The scout's voice grew quieter. "They know." Marcus nodded slowly. Of course they knew. Everyone knew. Word travelled. Merchants talked. Deserters talked. Officials talked. The North understood what was happening. Rome was leaving, and when Rome left, the wall would stand empty. The tribes beyond the frontier intended to make certain they arrived first. One of the younger officers spoke. "When do they move?" The scout answered immediately. "They already are." That evening, every officer in the fort attended a council. Not because there was hope of victory. There wasn't. The numbers were impossible. The northern garrisons had been drained repeatedly over the previous decade. Cohorts that once numbered 500 men now fielded half that, some less. The question was not whether the frontier could be held. It could not. The question was how much time could be bought. Marcus stood before a large map of northern Britannia. Pins marked forts, roads, settlements, supply depots. Many would soon be abandoned forever. "The evacuation column leaves tomorrow." Nobody looked surprised. Orders had arrived weeks earlier. Records, treasury funds, families, administrators, merchants. Anyone valuable to the province would move south toward Iberacum. Modern men might call it retreat. Romans preferred the term redeployment. The result was the same. Marcus pointed toward the military road behind the wall. "The column will require at least 3 days." One officer frowned. 3 days? Perhaps 4. The room darkened further. Everyone understood what that meant. Someone would have to stay. Someone would have to hold the frontier. Someone would have to delay the enemy. Marcus let the silence linger. Then he spoke. "I require volunteers." Nobody moved, not immediately. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder rolled again. The old tribune waited patiently. He had spent long enough in the army to know courage often arrived quietly. The first man to stand was Centurion Titus Varro, a veteran, 40 years old, missing 2 fingers from his left hand. First cohort. Marcus nodded. Another rose, then another, then another. Within minutes, most of the room was standing. No speeches followed, no grand declarations. Romans rarely behaved that way. They simply stood, accepted reality, and prepared to do their duty. Marcus looked around the room, at the faces illuminated by lamplight, men who knew exactly what they were volunteering for. None expected to survive. That was not the point. The point was time, 3 days, perhaps 4. Enough for the civilians to escape, enough for Britannia to say farewell. Enough for Rome to leave with dignity. Outside, the storm deepened. Beyond the wall, thousands of warriors gathered in the darkness. And inside the fort, the last defenders of Roman Britain quietly prepared for war. Not a campaign, not a battle, a final stand. One that would be remembered long after their names had been forgotten. Chapter 2. Preparing the Tomb. The rain continued for 3 days. By the standards of northern Britannia, this was hardly remarkable. Yet to the men stationed along Hadrian's wall, the weather seemed fitting. The province itself appeared to be mourning. From the western sea to the eastern coast, roads filled with travellers heading south. Wagons creaked beneath possessions gathered over generations. Civil servants packed records and treasury accounts into crates. Merchants loaded goods onto carts. Families prepared to leave homes they would never see again. Rome was departing, and everyone knew it. At Vindolanda, however, no one was leaving. The volunteers had been assembled. One cohort, 417 men. Not all were Romans. Many had never even seen Rome. Some were Britons. Others came from Gaul, a few from Germania, several from Hispania. Their fathers and grandfathers had settled in Britannia decades earlier, yet after years of service, they all shared something greater than birthplace. They were soldiers of Rome, and they had volunteered to remain. Tribune Marcus Flavius Corvinus stood atop the wall shortly after dawn and watched the evacuation column moving south. The sight stretched for miles. Hundreds of wagons, thousands of civilians, pack animals, military escorts, everything that remained valuable to the province. The column moved slowly along the military road, a great serpent winding through the rain. Marcus knew many of those departing: governors, officials, merchants, families, children, men who had once believed Rome would endure forever. Now they looked back frequently toward the frontier, toward the wall, toward the soldiers remaining behind. One young boy raised a hand. Marcus raised his own in reply. Then the column disappeared into the rain. A chapter of history ended. The tribune remained standing for a long time. Finally, Centurion Titus Varro joined him. "They're gone." Marcus nodded. "Yes." The centurion watched the empty road. "We should probably get to work." The tribune smiled faintly. A soldier's answer, simple, practical, necessary. Within an hour, every man in the cohort was busy. The preparations began immediately. Nearby forts had already been abandoned. Their remaining supplies were collected and brought to Vindolanda. Wagons arrived constantly: grain, salted meat, barrels of water, bundles of arrows, medical supplies, tools, anything useful, anything that might extend the defense by another hour, another day, another precious moment. Marcus ordered the destruction of everything that could not be carried. Storehouses were emptied. Equipment was broken. Weapons were hidden or buried. The enemy would inherit nothing useful. One abandoned fort was even burned. Its smoke rose for miles, a funeral pyre for Roman Britannia. Meanwhile, engineers strengthened the defences. The wall itself remained formidable, nearly 3 centuries old, stone, solid, unyielding. Yet Marcus trusted nothing. Every weakness was examined, every gate reinforced, every tower stocked. The north gate received particular attention. Everyone expected the main attack there. Massive timbers were bolted behind the doors. Additional barricades erected. Piles of stones prepared for dropping upon attackers. Pitch stored nearby. Not enough to win, enough to kill, enough to delay. The ditch north of the wall was cleared. Brush removed. Obstacles planted. Sharp stakes hammered into muddy ground. Every yard transformed into a killing field. The work continued day and night. No one complained, no one questioned. Every man understood. They were preparing a fortress. They were also preparing a grave. The distinction mattered less with each passing day. Late that afternoon, scouts returned. Mud covered their cloaks. Exhaustion marked every face. The news they carried was worse than before. Marcus listened carefully. Numbers. More. The scout pointed north. At least 5,000 now. Several officers exchanged grim looks. 5,000. Perhaps more. The tribes were gathering strength as they advanced. Additional clans joined daily. The invasion was becoming something unprecedented. The largest northern force seen in generations. The scout continued. "They're moving slowly." Marcus frowned. "Why?" "Wagons." Again that word. Wagons, families, livestock, children, not merely an army, an entire people on the move, seeking land, seeking opportunity, seeking what Rome was leaving behind. Marcus dismissed the scout and returned to the wall. The landscape beyond stretched endlessly northward, rolling hills, dark forests, mist-covered valleys, beautiful country, dangerous country. Soon it would be filled with enemies. The tribune rested both hands upon the ancient stone. 300 years earlier, Roman engineers had built this frontier. Legions had marched here. Emperors had visited. Entire generations had guarded it. Now the final chapter approached. Behind him came the sound of hammers, axes, voices. The work never stopped. Marcus turned. The fortress buzzed with activity. Archers fletched arrows. Blacksmiths repaired weapons. Engineers strengthened towers. Soldiers sharpened swords. Everywhere men prepared. Some joked, some sang. Others worked in silence. Each dealt with reality in his own way. That evening, a feast was held. Not because there was anything to celebrate. Quite the opposite. The food needed consuming. The wine needed drinking. Tomorrow might never come. The cohort gathered within the fort. Lantern light flickered across stone walls. Stories were told, songs were sung, old campaigns remembered, lost comrades toasted. Marcus moved among the men quietly, listening, observing, remembering faces. He knew many would soon be dead, perhaps all. The thought no longer frightened him. A strange peace had settled over the garrison. Once a man accepted death, certain worries simply disappeared. Late in the evening, Varro sat beside the tribune. The centurion stared into the fire. "You ever think about Rome?" Marcus smiled. "Which Rome?" "The real one. I was born there." Varro nodded. "I've never seen it." The old soldier poked at the flames. "My father was born in Britannia. So was mine." "Funny. What is?" Varro looked around the room, at the soldiers laughing nearby, at the walls surrounding them, at the province Rome had built. "We're probably the last Romans in Britain." Marcus considered this. The centurion was probably right. Most of the army had already gone. The administrators were leaving. The wealthy families were departing. Only soldiers remained. And soon they too would vanish. The empire was not ending, not yet. But in Britannia, it was. Outside, darkness settled over the wall. Rain drifted across the frontier. The northern hills disappeared beneath mist. Somewhere beyond them, thousands of warriors marched south, closer with every passing hour, closer with every mile. The scouts reported fresh campfires that night, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, visible even from the watchtowers. Tiny orange lights scattered across the darkness, like stars fallen to earth. Marcus climbed the wall shortly before midnight, alone. The wind tugged at his cloak. The frontier stretched away beneath moonlight. Then he saw them, the campfires, endless, a glowing sea upon the northern horizon. For a long time he stood watching. No fear, no anger, only sadness. The wall had held for nearly 3 centuries. Now its watch was ending. The tribune placed one hand upon the ancient stone. Cold, weathered, enduring. Then he spoke softly into the darkness, not as an officer, not as a commander, simply as a Roman. "You served us well." The wind carried the words away. Far beyond the wall, a distant horn echoed through the night. Then another and another. The enemy had arrived. The battle for Britannia would begin at dawn. The enemy came with the dawn. A cold grey light spread slowly across the northern hills, revealing a landscape transformed overnight. Where empty moorland had stood the previous evening, thousands of figures now moved across the horizon. Warriors, families, wagons, livestock, an entire migration advancing south. From atop the wall, Tribune Marcus Flavius Corvinus watched silently. The sight was unlike anything he had witnessed in 30 years of soldiering. Raiding parties were common. War bands were common. Even major tribal offensives occurred from time to time. This was different. This was a people on the move. The Picts came first. Tall figures wrapped in cloaks of wool and animal hide. Their long hair blew in the wind. Spears glinted beneath the weak morning sun. Behind them came the Scotti from Hibernia. Hard men from across the western sea. Many carried axes, others long knives. Some wore pieces of captured Roman armor taken during earlier raids. Beyond them stretched countless wagons, entire clans, entire communities, all moving south, all seeking what Rome was abandoning. The defenders watched from the wall. No one spoke. No one needed to. The scale of the threat was obvious. Centurion Titus Varro eventually broke the silence. 5,000. Marcus shook his head. More. The centurion frowned. How many? The tribune continued studying the advancing mass. 7, perhaps. Varro exhaled slowly. 7,000 against 417. The numbers were almost absurd. Yet strangely, the disparity brought a kind of calm. There would be no false hope, no illusions. Every man upon the wall understood exactly what awaited him. A horn sounded from the north, deep, ancient, mournful. Moments later, another answered, then another. Soon the entire frontier echoed with tribal war horns. The sound rolled across the hills like distant thunder. The enemy had arrived. The battle had begun. Yet no attack came immediately. The tribes halted beyond bowshot. Standards appeared. Leaders gathered. Warriors formed groups. The migration seemed to pause. Marcus understood why. They were studying the wall, judging its strength, looking for weakness. The Romans used the time well. Archers took positions. Artillery crews prepared their machines. Bundles of arrows were distributed. Water and food carried to the towers. Every man knew his place. Every man knew his task. By mid-morning, the first attack finally came. Not a grand assault, a probe, a test. Several hundred warriors advanced toward the ditch north of the wall. Their shields were painted with bright colors. Their leaders shouted encouragement. War cries echoed across the frontier. The Romans waited, patient, disciplined. The attackers reached the ditch. Immediately confusion spread through their ranks. The sharpened stakes hidden among mud and brush claimed their first victims. Men stumbled, others fell. The formation slowed. Marcus raised one hand. The archers waited. The enemy climbed from the ditch, still advancing. 50 yards, 40, 30. The tribune lowered his hand. 1,000 arrows darkened the sky. The effect was devastating. The front ranks collapsed instantly. Warriors tumbled forward. Others screamed. Some died where they stood. The survivors pressed onward. Then came the artillery. The great bolt throwers mounted atop the wall unleashed their missiles. Heavy, iron-tipped shafts tore through shields and flesh alike. One bolt killed 3 men before embedding itself in the earth. Another struck a tribal standard and hurled its bearer backward. The advance faltered. The survivors hesitated, then broke. Within moments, the warriors retreated toward their main force. The first attack was over. The battlefield fell silent, except for the wounded. Their cries drifted across the frontier, carried by the wind. Marcus remained expressionless. The enemy had learned something. So had he. The tribes were brave, determined, numerous, but they lacked siege experience. The wall still frightened them. For now. The rest of the day passed in a series of smaller attacks. Each followed a similar pattern. Warriors advanced, archers fired, artillery struck. The attackers withdrew. Bodies accumulated north of the ditch. The Romans suffered only light casualties, a handful of wounded, 1 dead, a young auxiliary from Eberacum, barely 20 years old. The men buried him before sunset. There would be no elaborate ceremony, no priest, no family, only comrades. Varro placed the soldier's helmet upon the grave, then covered it with earth. The cohort stood silently. 1 death. 416 defenders remained. As darkness approached, the tribes finally withdrew beyond bowshot. Campfires soon appeared across the northern landscape. Hundreds, then thousands. A sea of flickering orange lights. The enemy was preparing for a longer struggle. Marcus expected as much. The first day had taught them caution. Tomorrow would be different. That evening, the defenders gathered inside the fort. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon everyone. The fighting itself had been manageable. The waiting had been worse. Knowing what was coming, knowing what tomorrow might bring, that burden wore heavily upon the mind. The men ate quietly. Bread, salt pork, water. Conversation remained subdued. Eventually, one of the younger soldiers spoke. "Do you think they know?" Marcus looked up. "Know what?" The soldier hesitated. "That we're staying." The room grew still. The question lingered. Everyone understood what he meant. The evacuation. The civilians. The column heading south. Did the enemy realize what the Romans were doing? Marcus considered it, then nodded. "Yes." No one seemed surprised. The tribes had scouts, eyes, ears. They would have seen the roads, seen the wagons, seen the departure. One veteran laughed softly. "Then they know we're buying time." "Yes, and they know they can afford to lose men." Marcus nodded again. The laughter faded. The implication was obvious. The attackers possessed numbers. The defenders possessed only time. Eventually, one would run out. Late that night, Marcus walked the wall alone. The sky had cleared. Stars filled the heavens. The northern lights shimmered faintly upon the horizon. Green curtains dancing above the darkness. Beautiful, unnatural, almost ghostly. The tribune paused beside a watchtower. Beyond the wall, countless campfires glowed beneath the stars. The enemy slept, or prepared, or prayed. Tomorrow would be bloodier. Marcus knew it. The first day had merely tested the defenses. The second would seek to break them. A sound interrupted his thoughts. Footsteps. Varro approached. The old centurion carried 2 cups of watered wine. He handed one to the tribune. Neither spoke immediately. They simply stared north. Eventually, Varro asked, "Do you regret volunteering?" Marcus smiled. No. The centurion nodded. Neither do I. The two old soldiers stood together beneath the stars, watching the frontier, listening to distant voices drifting from enemy camps. Far to the south, beyond countless hills and forests, the evacuation column continued its journey. Families, children, citizens, everything Rome still wished to save. The rear guard had purchased one day, perhaps two. Tomorrow, they would purchase another, whatever the cost. The wind strengthened. Campfires flickered. A wolf howled somewhere beyond the wall. And beneath the cold stars of Britannia, the last defenders of Roman Britain prepared for a second day of war. A day that would be remembered long after the first had been forgotten. Chapter 4. The second day. The attack began before sunrise, not with horns, not with war cries, but with silence. A cold mist covered the frontier as dawn approached. Visibility shrank to less than 100 yards. The wall vanished into grey darkness. Watchtowers appeared as shadows. The northern landscape disappeared entirely. Tribune Marcus Flavius Corvinus disliked it immediately. The enemy had learned. The first day had shown them what happened when they attacked openly. Today, they would be cleverer, more dangerous. Marcus stood atop the gate tower, with Centurion Titus Varro beside him. The two veterans peered into the mist, listening, waiting. Somewhere beyond the fog, 7,000 enemies watched them. Neither side could see the other. That made everyone nervous. Then they heard it. The sound was faint at first. Wood striking earth. A dull rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Varro's expression hardened. Shields. Marcus nodded. The tribes were advancing under cover, using large shields, perhaps makeshift mantlets. Anything capable of protecting warriors from arrows. The sound grew louder. The Romans waited. Archers stood ready. Artillery crews gripped their machines. The entire wall seemed to hold its breath. Then shapes emerged. Dark forms materializing from the mist. Dozens, then hundreds. Warriors advancing in tight groups. Many carried crude wooden screens before them. Others pushed carts piled with timber. The attack had begun. Fire! Roman archers loosed immediately. The first arrows vanished into the fog. Screams followed. Several attackers fell. Others continued. The shield screens absorbed much of the punishment. The enemy pressed closer. 40 yards, 30, 20. The artillery opened fire. The great bolt throwers thundered. Heavy shafts smashed through wooden barriers and the men behind them. One machine hurled a bolt completely through 3 warriors before it disappeared into the mist beyond. Another shattered a shield wall in a spray of splintered wood and blood. Yet still they came. The defenders realized the enemy's objective almost too late. The carts, the timber, the bundles of brush, the tribes were filling the ditch. Warriors rushed forward carrying armfuls of wood. Many died instantly. More replaced them. Soon the sharpened stakes vanished beneath debris. The ditch itself began disappearing. A crossing point was being created. Marcus swore quietly. The tribes were sacrificing men to create a bridge, and they possessed enough men to afford it. By mid-morning, the first warriors reached the base of the wall. For the first time in nearly 3 centuries, enemies stood directly beneath the stone frontier. The fighting changed instantly. Arrows mattered less. Now came stones, javelins, spears, boiling water, anything that could be thrown downward. The defenders hurled rocks onto heads below. Skulls cracked, bones shattered, men died screaming. Others climbed over the bodies. The dead became steps. The wounded became obstacles. The attack grew increasingly savage. Marcus found himself fighting alongside ordinary soldiers. One warrior reached the parapet, a huge Pict with blue tattoos across his face. The man swung an axe wildly. A legionary collapsed. The axe had split his helmet nearly in two. Marcus drew his sword. The Pict turned. For a moment both men stared at one another. Then the warrior charged. The tribune stepped aside. His blade flashed once. The Pict stumbled. A red line appeared across his throat. Moments later he toppled backward from the wall, disappearing into the chaos below. There was no time to think, no time to reflect, only survival. Hour after hour the battle continued. The mist eventually burned away. The full horror became visible. Bodies covered the northern slope, hundreds of them, perhaps more. Dead warriors, dead Romans, broken shields, discarded weapons. Blood turned mud black. Crows already circled overhead, waiting. The enemy finally withdrew shortly before sunset. Not because they wished to, because they had to. The losses had become unsustainable. The wall remained Roman. For another day, a cheer rose from the defenders, weak, exhausted, yet genuine. They had survived. Again. Marcus did not join in. He walked slowly along the battlements, counting, assessing, remembering. The numbers troubled him. The dead were gathered after dark. 37 Romans, nearly 50 wounded, many badly, too many, far too many. The rear guard had begun with 417 men. Now fewer than 380 remained fit for duty. The enemy had paid a much higher price. Hundreds littered the battlefield, yet the tribes possessed thousands more. The Romans did not. That evening felt different. The feast-like atmosphere of the previous night had vanished. Reality had arrived. The men sat quietly around small fires, cleaning wounds, repairing equipment, writing letters few expected to be delivered. One soldier carved his wife's name into a shield. Another spent an hour staring at a child's wooden toy he carried in his pack. The fort had become a place of memories, a place where men thought increasingly about home. Marcus visited the infirmary shortly after dark. The sight remained with him long afterward. Rows of wounded filled the room, bandaged, broken, dying. Some would recover, many would not. One young auxiliary from Londinium grabbed his arm as he passed. The soldier could not have been older than 18. "Sir," Marcus knelt beside him. "What is it?" The young man hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did we buy them another day?" The tribune understood immediately. The evacuation column, the civilians, the families, the purpose of the sacrifice. Marcus nodded. "Yes." The soldier smiled, then relaxed, as though reassured. Marcus stayed beside him until sleep finally came. Outside, the wall stood silent beneath moonlight. The battlefield remained scattered with the dead. The enemy campfires glowed brighter than ever, more numerous, closer. Across the frontier, tribal leaders prepared for a final assault. They had learned the Roman strengths. Now they would exploit the weaknesses. Marcus knew it. Varro knew it. Everyone knew it. The third day would decide everything. The wall had held, but only just. The defenders had paid dearly. And somewhere far to the south, beyond forests and hills, the evacuation column was now safely beyond reach. The mission had succeeded. The civilians would live. Rome's departure would continue. The rear guard had achieved its purpose, yet none of the men upon the wall spoke of leaving. None discussed retreat. None suggested escape, because they all understood the truth. If they abandoned the frontier now, the enemy would move south immediately. Everything would have been for nothing. No, the wall would be held one final day, one final battle, one final stand. And as darkness settled over northern Britannia, the last defenders of Roman Britain sharpened their swords and prepared to meet their fate. For dawn was coming, and with it, the end. Chapter 5, the third day. The final attack began before dawn. The men upon the wall did not need scouts to tell them. They felt it. The air itself seemed different, heavy, waiting. The stars still shone above northern Britannia when Tribune Marcus Flavius Corvinus climbed the gate tower one last time. A bitter wind swept across the frontier. Below, the battlefield of the previous 2 days lay hidden beneath darkness. Somewhere out there lay hundreds of dead. Romans, Picts, Scotti, men who had seen the same dawns and felt the same rain, and now belonged only to the earth. Marcus rested his hands upon the ancient stone parapet. For nearly 3 centuries, Roman soldiers had stood where he stood now, watching, waiting, guarding. Now the watch was ending. A horn sounded, far beyond the wall, then another and another. Soon dozens of horns echoed across the darkness. The enemy was assembling. The tribune looked south. The road behind the wall disappeared into the distance. Empty. The evacuation column was gone, safe. 3 days earlier, that road had been crowded with wagons and families. Now there was nothing. The mission had succeeded. The civilians had escaped. Rome's final withdrawal from Britannia would continue. The rear guard had done its duty. All that remained was survival, or death. Marcus smiled faintly. The latter seemed considerably more likely. Below him, soldiers were already gathering. Many had not slept. Others had slept only briefly. Every man understood what this day would bring. The enemy had spent 2 days learning. Today they would commit everything. The tribune descended from the tower. The cohort assembled in the central courtyard. 331 men remained capable of fighting. The number struck Marcus harder than he expected. 3 days earlier, there had been 417. Now nearly a quarter of the force was gone. Dead, wounded, dying. The surviving soldiers stood silently in the cold morning air, faces lined with exhaustion, armor scarred and dented, bandages visible everywhere. Yet no one stepped out of formation. No one attempted to leave. Marcus looked at them. Britons, Gauls, Germans, Spaniards, men from every corner of the empire, united by service, united by fate. He had no grand speech prepared, no stirring words. Such things belonged to poets, not soldiers, so he simply told them the truth. The column escaped. A murmur moved through the ranks. Not surprise, relief. Marcus continued. The civilians are beyond danger. More relief. Some men smiled. Others bowed their heads briefly. The tribune nodded. That was our task. Silence returned. Then he added quietly, and we accomplished it. The words mattered. The men needed to hear them. Because victory and survival are not always the same thing. The cohort had already won. Now they merely had to endure the consequences. A scout climbed the tower shortly afterward. His report was short and grim. The enemy was advancing, all of them. No reserves, no second line, no caution. The entire host. The final assault had begun. The sun rose behind grey clouds. The first attackers appeared shortly thereafter. Not hundreds, thousands. The sight stunned even veterans. The northern horizon seemed alive with movement. Warriors stretched across the landscape from east to west. Standards fluttered. Axes gleamed. Spears formed forests of iron points. The tribes had decided the war would fall today, whatever the cost. Marcus looked along the battlements. Every tower was manned, every position occupied, every weapon ready. The defenders stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting. The first arrows arrived just after sunrise. Not many. A few scattered shafts. Testing range, testing nerve. Then came hundreds. The sky darkened. Arrows rattled against shields and stone. Men ducked. Several screamed. One archer tumbled from the parapet with a shaft through his throat. The main attack followed immediately. The enemy surged forward. Thousands of warriors charging together. The earth seemed to shake beneath their feet. Marcus had witnessed battles before. Many battles. Yet the sight still stole his breath. The sheer weight of humanity moving toward the wall. The noise, the fury, the inevitability. It felt less like an army and more like a flood. The Roman artillery opened fire. Bolt throwers thundered. Heavy missiles smashed through packed ranks. Men died, dozens at a time. Yet the advance never slowed. More warriors filled every gap. The ditch vanished beneath bodies and timber. The attackers reached the base of the wall within minutes. Ladders appeared, dozens, then hundreds. The final battle became hand to hand. Marcus found himself fighting continuously. A warrior climbed the parapet. The tribune stabbed him. Another followed. Then another. The dead accumulated around his feet. Blood slicked the stone. The air filled with screams. Axes hacked. Shields shattered. Men slipped and fell from the wall into the chaos below. At the north gate, the attack reached its peak. The reinforced doors shook beneath repeated impacts. A ram. The enemy had built a ram. Each strike echoed through the fort. Boom, boom, boom. The timbers groaned. Marcus sent reserves. Too few. Always too few. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time became meaningless. There was only fighting, killing, surviving. The gate finally broke shortly after midday. The sound echoed across the entire fortress. A tremendous crack, then splintering wood, then shouting. The enemy poured through. The wall had been breached. Centurion Titus Varro immediately led a counterattack. The old veteran gathered every available soldier and charged directly into the opening. Marcus watched him disappear into the melee. For several moments nothing could be seen except flashing steel and bodies. Then the breach stabilized, barely, at terrible cost. When Varro emerged again, blood covered him from head to foot. Most was not his, not all. The centurion had suffered a deep wound across his shoulder, another along his cheek. Yet he remained standing. "Still here," he growled. Marcus laughed despite everything, then returned to fighting. By mid-afternoon, the Romans were falling back through the fort itself. Tower by tower, courtyard by courtyard. Every building became a fortress, every doorway a battlefield. The enemy paid dearly for every step, yet numbers told. Numbers always tell eventually. The defenders dwindled, 200, then 150, then less. The infirmary became a final refuge. The wounded who could still stand took up weapons. Those who could not passed arrows and water to the others. No one surrendered. No one asked permission to. The sun began descending. The end approached. Marcus knew it. So did everyone else. The cohort made its final stand around the headquarters building. The heart of the fort, the administrative center, the symbolic heart of Roman authority. Perhaps 80 men remained, perhaps fewer. Varro stood beside the tribune. His shield was gone, his helmet lost, his sword chipped beyond repair. Yet somehow he still smiled. 3 days. Marcus nodded. 3 days. The centurion looked toward the south, toward the empty road, toward the province they had saved. Long enough. Yes, long enough. The two words seemed to settle over the battlefield. Long enough. The civilians had escaped. The mission had succeeded. The wall had held. Rome had departed with dignity. Nothing more remained. The final assault began shortly before sunset. The enemy surrounded the headquarters from every side. Thousands remained. The Romans could field barely 70 men. The outcome was obvious. Yet when the attack came, the defenders met it with the same discipline they had shown on the first day. Shield wall, spears, swords, Rome until the end. The battle became desperate, savage, personal. Marcus fought beside men whose names he had known for decades. One by one they fell. The standard bearer, the armourer, the young recruit from Londinium, the old archer from Gaul. The faces blurred together. The losses became endless. Eventually, Marcus realized he could no longer see Varro. The centurion had vanished into the fighting. Whether dead or alive, nobody knew. The tribune continued regardless, because there was nothing else left to do. The sun touched the western horizon. Golden light briefly illuminated the fort. The blood, the smoke, the shattered walls, the fallen. For one beautiful moment, the entire frontier seemed frozen in time. Then darkness began to fall, and with it came the end of Roman Britain. The last defenders fought until the light faded completely. Then they fought in darkness. Then they fought by firelight. And finally, they fought no more. The next morning, the enemy found only silence within the ruined fort. No living Romans remained. The cohort had perished to the last man, their duty complete. Their watch ended. Far to the south, the evacuation continued. Families survived. Children survived. The memory of Rome survived. And because of that, the sacrifice upon the wall had meaning. The frontier was lost. Britannia was lost. The empire was retreating. Yet for 3 final days, one cohort had stood against the darkness, and in those 3 days, they had given a dying province time to say goodbye. The end.